Christoph Griebling, German Embassy. I have a question, maybe it's hypothetical or theoretical, but what would happen if President Obama would decide tomorrow, I close down Guantanamo? He as commander-in-chief, if he would do this, what would happen then? Could anyone or could Congress really block it, or what would happen if he would make this decision tomorrow?
Well, there are practical problems now with where the people can go. So it takes work to get it so you can empty the people out of Guantanamo. You really need to open it up so people can come to the United States, certain of them, certainly, and make it easier for them to go to third countries. It's a little bit like, and I go back to the Lincoln thing. Lincoln couldn't just say, I'm not going to allow slaves anymore. He needs to work it through a democratic political process here that is difficult, but you've got to work it. I mean, so you couldn't do it tomorrow. There are a certain number of people who can't go back to Syria, who can't go back to China, others who really can't go anywhere. They may need to be in the United States for a while. By the way, if they're in the United States for a while, I think we could effectively challenge detentions of those people who are being illegally detained. There are people, there are Kuwaitis there who could go home. So you need to work it, but you need to be committed to work it and get them out of there. Fact is, he hasn't done that.
Yeah, I would say that the problem is that we have to define who those groups of people are. And we've done some of that today. The Yemenis, the other people that Tom talked about. I mean, while Tom was talking, I just realized that there is one stateless Palestinian still at Guantanamo. You can't return Palestinians from Guantanamo because you have to go through Israel, and those negotiations never went anywhere. So all the other Palestinians in Guantanamo, there were a handful of them, have been resettled in other countries. This young man was actually, he was almost taken in by the German government in August 2009. The Germans were going to take 3 and only took 2 in the end, and he's 1. He can't go anywhere until somebody offers him a new home. So he's just one example. So, there are the Yemenis, there are the other cleared prisoners, and then there are the rest of the prisoners, the ones who are either designated for trials or indefinite detention. There's only those 3 groups for us to talk about, but that's what we have to push when we're talking about how to close the prison.
I think if you look back at the memos that were written on, that gave President Bush the authority, the justification to do what he did, says as commander-in-chief you have limitless, anything that will constrain that exercise of authority is unconstitutional. So basically the president has limitless power. So if that was good advice back then I think the president as commander-in-chief could make a decision in that capacity. Well, the NDAA says no money appropriated herein may be used. That's the Defense Department appropriation. The president controls a lot of other executive branch agencies that have budgets and airplanes and the ability to arrange transportation. So, I mean, it would take, growing a big pair, but if he ever did...
Well, let me say it, because when the Obama administration came up and they signed the order to close Guantanamo within a year, there was a plan. First, they were going to do this review process very conservatively. It took longer than it should have, but they realized that in order to get third countries to take people from Guantanamo, we had to take some. And there was a plan to put the Uyghurs in Northern Virginia, where there's a Uyghur community too. And these are totally innocent people. And they were going to do it. And a congressman found out about it and stood up and said, you can't take these Guantanamo terrorists to my country.
Was that Frank Wolf?
Frank Wolf. And no, in fairness, Obama hasn't set the stage. I mean, it's a long thing. He announced the closing of Guantanamo. Dick Cheney said this is a horrible idea. These are the worst of the worst. A statement that was palpably false, because 40 of the people had been cleared by the Bush administration. 40 more won habeas cases. Either Cheney was lying consciously or he didn't know the facts. In any event, the Obama administration didn't take them on, and that kept being repeated. When they were going to take the Uyghurs into Virginia, Frank Wolf stood up and said, don't you dare do that. They backed down. The Obama administration backed down. From that moment on, Congress jumped in and said, well, you can't take them. They were winning things. They pushed them. So what he's got to do again is, as Mo vividly said, he's got to grow a pair of big ones, but he's got to push it. He's got to have a plan, and he's got to work it. There are problems, but it's doable, and he's got the power to do it. It'll take a few months, but he could do it.
But there's no political value in doing it.
There's no political value. It's got to be a moral imperative.
John.
It's his legacy. It's your legacy. Yeah.
And Johnny, just the lady here behind you. Sorry, Ange.
Where am I going?
Yeah.
That guy who keeps.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Ladies.
Sorry, I'm Olga Pradhan. I'm from the Constitution Project's Task Force on Detainee Treatment. Colonel Davis mentioned Jennifer Descal's op-ed in the New York Times yesterday, and I was wondering, this is sort of a corollary off of the previous question, but there are, rightly or wrongly, a number of individuals who've been slated for indefinite detention, and I know that Mr. Wilner just said that if they were brought here, we could begin to argue against the indefinite detention, but there's also the argument emerging that if they were to be brought here, if Guantanamo were to be closed, they would likely be held in federal supermax prisons where the conditions would actually be much worse than at Guantanamo. So I was interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Okay, if I could just jump in, because you mentioned the word likely, which Jennifer Descal also did in her argument in the newspaper. Likely, so this isn't confirmed that they would be held in supermax conditions. What she's done with that very damaging op-ed, I have to say, is that she's made it look as though there's no argument to be had about what might happen if we were to proceed with the very sensible argument that prisoners need to be brought here for us to begin the process of genuinely closing Guantanamo, and that they would undoubtedly have more rights if they were brought here. Likely. Maybe it is likely, but why does she not say we could argue about that? That negotiations would be able to take place about what conditions these men would be held in. Why would they be held in supermax conditions when they're men who have never been charged or tried or convicted of anything? There's no direct correlation between the people in Guantanamo and anybody held in any form of prison system in the United States. It would have to be negotiated.
Well, can I say a few things about it, too? Because it's very important this article was out. First of all, Guantanamo is a supermax prison. I've been down there several times. It's as supermax as the supermax prisons here. So people who say conditions are good there, they're terrible. You know, and let me tell you why they're terrible, too. Not only are they in supermax conditions, but they're in a place where they're isolated and they can't see their families. At a supermax prison in Chicago or somewhere else, families get to visit. They get to visit their families. They've been away. They haven't seen their families for 11 years. They are allowed a call now once a month where they can talk back home. So that's something, if they were in the United States, they get to see their families. There's another significant fact that Jennifer and others don't realize. The reason I say you can challenge it here, while they're in Guantanamo, I probably shouldn't say this publicly because maybe people will realize it, but the basic fact is at Guantanamo, they're within the jurisdiction of the D.C. Circuit. The reason they can't challenge their detentions is the D.C. Circuit has adopted a rule which says you lose a habeas case if the government has any evidence against you that is credible. That's an absurd rule. If they were somewhere else, they would be in a different circuit, and you could challenge their detention. Indefinite detention is not legal under U.S. law. There needs to be a basis for it. If there's no basis for it, other circuits might accept it. You know, the other thing, well, and we could, oh no, let me say the other thing. Andy's absolutely right. A year or 3 years ago, when the Obama administration said, let's take these people to Thompson, I talked with the Obama administration. I said, we don't want these people to be in supermax conditions. They said, we will agree to hold them to the extent they are consistent with the Geneva Conventions, where they're not held now. So Andy's right. It's all negotiable. People assume the worst. You know, I frankly think the reason a lot of people assume that they shouldn't come to the United States is because there's some lawyers who benefit from Guantanamo being open. It gives them a source of employment. It gives them their notoriety. And I think it's as simple as that. The human rights organizations who are opposing it, they said, will import indefinite detention to the United States it's just wrong thinking. It's wrong-headed thinking.
This gentleman over here.
How do you think I feel about that one?
Thank you. My name is Kunio Kikuchi, and I'm with Washington Research and Analysis. Happy New Year. I met you last year, too, around this time. And you mentioned the cost of detainees, but the cost, not the dollar cost, but the cost to United States in terms of reputation and credibility of having Guantanamo Bay is probably much higher than the dollar cost. And at the end of this presidential election, one of my friends in Japan, I'm Japanese too, wrote to me and said, it's a pity that the American people had the choice, the better choice for the American people was a flunky such as President Obama. And the reason he said President Obama as a flunky was because he couldn't even deliver on the very simple statement that he is going to close Guantanamo Bay. Now, listening to you, it's a little bit murky. I'm not so sure whether you're concerned about the civil rights of the prisoners or the fact that the Guantanamo Bay itself is something that the U.S. should not keep open, as the German gentleman has said.
Okay.
My question is, which is it? Closing Guantanamo Bay or giving justice to the people and the 186 people? When you go into that track, then everybody loses track of what's really the issue.
Well, I don't understand the distinction. I mean, I think it's you give justice to people. It's certainly unjust to hold people indefinitely without hearings or cause. And Guantanamo is a symbol of that. And you got to get them out of there. You got to close that and get them out of there.
Well, I don't want to get in an argument on that.
I think your first point about the cost, not just the economic cost that you can put a dollar figure on, but the cost to America, the intangible cost. I mean, I think we saw that not too long ago with Abu Hamza, who was extradited from the UK to America. I mean, I guess the UK is our closest ally in the war on terror. And our closest ally made us promise that before they would extradite Abu Hamza, we wouldn't send him to Guantanamo and we wouldn't prosecute him in a military commission, which to me is a statement about Guantanamo and the military commissions, and we have to promise our closest friend that we won't use it or they won't give us Abu Hamza.
We've got about 2 minutes left. Is there anything that anybody wants to say in closing?
Well, I want to repeat again that I think that, there are some people at Guantanamo who should justifiably be punished, and they should be tried accordingly and punished. And that will be justice. For most people, their justice will be releasing them and getting them home, or getting them out of prison. Guantanamo stands in the way of doing that because it's isolated, it's outside the normal U.S. court system, and to the extent they do have court review, it's stuck in the D.C. Circuit. We could talk, there are a lot of little practical problems to getting it closed. It's very easy, really, to do. There are political problems. My main point has got to be, and when I looked at the president, this is your legacy. You could do it. Get it done. Make it a priority. Work the problem and get it done. Put somebody in charge in the White House of doing it. Put your own power behind it. There are lots of problems in this country, from the fiscal cliff to, the next thing and all this. This is a moral issue that defines our nation. It will define your presidency. You will be to blame if this isn't done. Get it done.
Just very briefly, indefinite detention without charge or trial is an abomination, legally, morally, ethically, spiritually. Indefinite detention without charge or trial is what? It's the reality for nearly all the men who are held at Guantanamo now, and will be for the foreseeable future unless we can act on that. And we can very obviously begin by highlighting and acting on the most obvious form of injustice of clearing people for release and not releasing them. And remember, if you didn't know it before, do remember, some of these men were cleared for release 8 years ago and are still held. And that's unacceptable under any circumstances whatsoever.
No, I would just say that America is a light unto the world. And it's a question of whether we're a warning light or a guiding light. And I think we ought to be a guiding light.
Great. Well, thank you to all three of you, and thanks for people coming here.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Peter.
I work for